Good morning, everyone. We're going to begin our service this morning with our opening song provided by Lynn Israel in her video performance.
Whoever you are, we welcome you. Wherever you come from, we welcome you. Whomever you love, we welcome you. Whoever you are, we welcome you. Wherever you come from, we welcome you. Whomever you love, we welcome you.
Thank you, Lynn. So good morning again, everyone, on this beautiful, sunny, and warm Sunday. I am Megan Rancier, and I will be presenting service today along with Lucy Long. Robin Perry and Kevin and Noelle McClooney are providing technical assistance today. Thank you all so much for tuning in. We're glad that we can keep in touch and support our community, even if we can't be together in person. Please be aware that we are recording this service and it will be posted on our Facebook and YouTube pages. We greet you today as you join us in a wider search for truth and purpose. In this quest, may we encounter one another with open hearts and minds. May we inspire each other to consider new questions and seek deeper meaning. And may we cultivate wisdom and compassion. Let all who enter this place see a welcome face, hear a kind word, and find comfort in this community. May all that we do and say here today help us to be a force for positive change in the world. Please take a moment to think of all your friends at MVUUC. Greet them with a comment in the chat box. And remember that you can still reach out to them through email, phone, and social media, or video chat. Physical distancing does not need to mean emotional distancing. Let us support one another. Visitors, as we are a diverse group with varying interests and beliefs, our services are varied in format, tone, and topic. We encourage you to view several services to gain a good understanding of our congregation. If you'd like to start receiving our weekly email newsletter, please email us at news@mvuuc.org, and that email address is in the chat box. MVUUC remains committed to supporting our friends and members during this difficult time of social distancing. For that reason, we are coordinating assistance with things like groceries, phone calls, and other needs. If this sounds like something that would be helpful to you, please send an email to sac@mvuuc.org with your name and what kind of assistance you would like to request. And that email address, sac@mvuuc.org, is also in the chat box. Now is the time for announcements. Announcements can be sent ahead of service to services@mvuuc.org. That address is also in the chat box. If you have an important announcement now, you can raise your hand by clicking the raise hand button at the bottom of the participant box in Zoom. Then we will announce your name and turn on your mic and camera so you can make your announcement yourself. You can also put your announcement in the chat box if you would like Robin to read it. So Robin, are there any announcements today?
There is one announcement from Winnie so far that says that the Spirit and Practice workshop is meeting again today at 1 o'clock on Zoom. Currently, we do not have any in the services email, and now I am waiting for more in the chat box.
While we're waiting, I will make two announcements. Our next anti-racism book club meeting is going to be this coming Thursday. I believe that's the 15th of November. No, sorry, it's the 12th. The 12th of November is going to be our next book club meeting at 7 p.m. via Zoom. You can email me at sac@mvuuc.org if you'd like to join us. The second announcement from me is that the Social Action Committee will be meeting on November 18th. That's a Wednesday night. That will also be at 7 p.m. through Zoom. And you can also email me at sac@mvuuc.org if you would like to join that meeting. So thank you in advance.
And it doesn't look like there's any other announcements for right now.
Great. Thank you, Robin. So now we're going to do the chalice lighting, and Lucy is going to lead us through that.
Okay, the chalice will be lit today by Megan. Please join me in reading the words for the chalice lighting that appear as a comment in the chat box. We light this chalice in hope that we may always remain a strong community that supports, challenges, and cheers us.
And now we will have a video performance of an old-time tune titled Cornbread and Butterbeans, performed by the Carolina Chocolate Drops.
Beans and you across the table, eating them beans and making love as long as I am able. Hoeing corn and cotton too, and when the day is over, ride the mule and cut the fool and love again all over. Goodbye and don't you cry, I'm going to Louisiana. Buy a coon dog and a big fat hog and marry Susiana. Sing song and ding dong, I'll take a trip to China. Cornbread and butter beans and back to North Carolina. Cornbread and butter beans and you across the table, eating them beans and making love as long as I am able. Hoeing corn and cotton too, and when the day is over, ride the mule and cut the fool and love again all over. Shoes and drinking booze, it goes against the Bible. Necktie will make you die and cause you lots of trouble. Streetcars and whiskey bars and kissing pretty women. Women, yeah, that's the end of a terrible beginning. Cornbread and butter beans and you across the table, eating them beans and making love as long as I am able. Hoeing corn and cotton too, and when the day is over, ride the mule and cut the fool and love again all over. Can't read and don't care, and education's awful. Writing, checking, raising heck, it ought to be unlawful.
I think it is.
Silk hose and frilly clothes is just a waste of money.
Yeah, that's true.
Come with me and stay with me and say you'll be my honey.
I'll be your honey.
And cornbread and butter beans and you across the table, eating them beans and making love as long as I am able. Hoeing corn and cotton too, and when the day is over, ride the mule and cut the fool and love again all over. Butter beans and you across the table, eating them beans and making love as long as I am able. Hoeing corn and cotton too, and when the day is over, ride the mule and cut the fool and love again all over.
Our opening words for today are a few selected quotes from The Art of Eating by M.F.K. Fisher. It seems to me that our three basic needs for food and security and love are so mixed and mingled and entwined that we cannot straightly think of one without the others. So it happens that when I write of hunger, I am really writing about love and the hunger for it, and warmth and the love of it, and the hunger for it, and then the warmth and richness and fine reality of hunger satisfied. And it is all one. The smell of good bread baking, like the sound of lightly flowing water, is indescribable in its evocation of innocence and delight. Bread making is one of those almost hypnotic businesses, like a dance from some ancient ceremony. It leaves you filled with one of the world's sweetest smells. There is no chiropractic treatment, no yoga exercise, no hour of meditation in a music-throbbing chapel that will leave you emptier of bad thoughts than this homely ceremony of making bread. There are very few men and women, I suspect, who cooked and marketed their way through the past war without losing forever some of the nonchalant extravagance of the 20s. They will feel, until their final days on earth, a kind of culinary caution. Butter, no matter how unlimited, is a precious substance not lightly to be wasted. Meats, too, and eggs, and all the far-brought spices of the world take on a new significance, having once been so rare. And that is good, for there can be no more shameful carelessness than with the food we eat for life itself. When we exist without thought or thanksgiving, we are not men, but beasts. I am more modest now, but I still think that one of the pleasantest of all emotions is to know that I with my brain and my hands, have nourished my beloved few, that I have concocted a stew or a story, a rarity or a plain dish, to sustain them truly against the hungers of the world.
Thank you, Megan. Thank you, Megan. It's so warm today, and I think everyone's rejoicing in the good news yesterday. So comfort doesn't feel like something we actually need right now. So, however, this this is a project that I have been working on, and I invite everyone, if you go to the next slide, to the next, yeah. This is an exhibit, an online exhibit, and I invite everyone to check into this, and you can see how people around the world have responded, to the stress that we're all going through during the pandemic, and you can see different ways in which people have been using food. And feel free to add your own experiences onto that exhibit too. Okay, Robin, go to the next one. Okay, so comfort food has been a very popular response to the stress of the pandemic. Because in the U.S. we tend to feel like there are good foods and bad foods, and the bad foods are those that taste really good, but we know they're not as nutritious as they should be. And we kind of need an excuse to be able to eat them. And if we're feeling stressed or lonely or depressed, that's an emotional excuse to be bad and eat bad food. So this has been happening a lot during the pandemic. And a lot of the food media has been publishing recipes for comfort food. And there's a real encouragement, to be cooking and baking as a way to relieve stress. However, it doesn't work for everyone. And part of that is because everyone has different comfort foods. Robin, you can go through the next few photographs. These are some of my comfort foods. Okay, this is cheese from North Carolina, from the county where my father's from. Also, the cornbread and butter beans song I picked out because I grew up with cornbread and butter beans. That is one of my comfort foods. The next photo, pickles, Appalachian pickles. Okay, the next photo, this is not my comfort food, but it is for a lot of people in the South, pork cracklings. Okay, the next one, moon pies and fried apple pies. That again, that's the food industry that thinks, okay, these are comfort foods, and they are for many people. Comfort food for me is eating food with family, my daughter, and some of those foods. This is actually a very gourmet presentation of Southern comfort foods, grits, grits made into cakes. Okay, mozzarella, but you can see this is fine dining kinds of food. In the Midwest, we have maple syrup and green bean casserole. Let's see, you can keep going. Okay, that's the photograph of the grits cakes. Okay, maple syrup. Okay, and then we'll stop on green bean casserole. Okay, so I show you those photographs just to kind of get you thinking about what your comfort food is, and how your own comfort food is reflecting your own experiences, your own personalities, your personal values, your personal taste. And for a lot of us, eating this food can be very comforting. It doesn't work for everyone. The idea that you can choose food to be comforting or not comforting, the idea of privilege is inherent in that. We have the privilege to actually choose comforting food over non-comforting food. Also, the results can backfire. Too much of this comfort food is definitely not comforting. We end up gaining too much weight or feeling sick. But also, there's a lot of discomfort in the activities that are around food, or what we would call foodways. Going shopping, can be a very scary thing. Constantly cooking food, that type of thing. So these activities, we end up finding that there's a lot of discomfort. So one of the things that I started noticing when the pandemic hit was all the discomfort that people were expressing around Foodways activities. At the same time, people were finding new ways to find comfort. And, so we're seeing this flip side of comfort is discomfort, and then this creativity that people were coming up with in order to create comfort through Foodways. So let's go to the next slide, Robin. Okay, so what I started doing, I developed an oral history project through my nonprofit, Center for Food and Culture. And I had students and recent graduates working with me from all over the world doing interviews. And we were interviewing people about their experiences of finding comfort in discomfort through Foodways during the pandemic. So what we did is we started off, we'd always ask people, what are your comfort foods? But then we start going through all the different processes involved in food and eating. And so we start off with production. Okay, so the questions that you're seeing now on the screen, these would be some of the interview questions. Okay, so part of what we started finding, the discomforts around production, people were worried that there was not going to be enough food. And so one of the responses to that was hoarding, which was not particularly comforting, but it definitely could be. But even more comforting, people started looking at gardening and producing their own food. So, that wasn't just a matter of now they had enough food. They also were reconnecting with the earth. They were reconnecting with the seasons. That wasn't the original purpose in the gardening. They were just worried about having enough food, but that ended up being one of the side results. People were making things from scratch, because some food could not be purchased anymore. So people were learning new skills. Okay, all of that was very comforting to people. Okay, procurement, means how you obtain your food. Okay, and going shopping was a huge issue at the beginning. We might all remember how there were stories about people, wiping all the food off, with cleaning materials and like soaking things before they'd eat them. And now that we know more about the virus, we're not doing those types of things. It's not as scary an activity to do, but a lot of us, I did not go into a grocery store for 3 months. And a lot of people, who were either vulnerable or around people who were very vulnerable, were just not going shopping. So part of what started happening, neighbors started looking out for each other. Friends started saying, I'm going to Costco or wherever, I'm doing bulk shopping. Do you need anything? There was this sense of community that was being developed around shopping, okay? An activity that most of us just think of as a chore. So all of a sudden, this was an opportunity for creating social networks, affirming friendships, okay, demonstrating our care and concern for other people. Okay, plus farmers markets and outdoor types of markets started being very, very popular for obvious reasons. And this has been a huge boost to a lot of the local farming communities throughout the country. We were sharing ingredients. So if someone didn't have yeast, they would ask around to their friends, do you have any yeast? I have some friends who were sharing sourdough or sourdough starter, and that ended up being passed around among them all. They ended up then baking bread and having a big outdoor picnic where they all shared their bread that had all been started from that sourdough. So from that sourdough starter, so it was a very affirming kind of event. that affirmed their sense of community. Okay, next slide. Okay, so from procurement, we go to preservation. Once you get your ingredients in your food, what do you do with it? How do you store it so it doesn't go bad? One of the things a lot of people started to do, and I had to do this, I went through my freezer and my cupboards, and I kind of did an inventory of exactly what I had. I discovered I had some things in there that, that were like, 3 or 4 years old, tucked in the back. So cleaning it out, making an inventory, organizing it. These are just kind of basic cleaning tasks. However, it gave me a sense of order. It gave me a sense of control. I now knew exactly what I had. I knew what meals I could make. I knew that I'd be able to get through without having to go shopping for a while. Plus, as I was pulling things out of my freezer, there are all sorts of memories. Many of you are aware that my oldest son died from cancer almost 3 years ago now. And, so I was kind of going back and forth a lot, and I would get some food, and then I'd get a phone call, I have to go to Wisconsin to the hospital. And so I'd stick stuff in the freezer. So I was pulling these things out, and the memories were overwhelming. And, and we're also very positive, all these very good times, that was not something I expected to get just from cleaning my freezer. So it's a very unexpected source of comfort. Also, a lot of people started learning how to can foods. There's a huge shortage of canning lids. So all sorts of creative ways, how you can make freezer pickles and, things of that sort. I didn't realize you can also dry tomatoes. So that, there are all these very creative things that are happening. That gives people not only a sense of control, but it fulfills these needs for creativity that we have, and it's an aesthetic experience, that's very, very comforting. Okay, so let's go on to the next one. The next slide, which would be preparation, okay, preparing food. A lot of people, it was very discomforting for a lot of people to suddenly have to prepare 3 meals a day, and be preparing meals for the entire family 3 meals a day. This made meal preparation and cooking very, very tedious, very time consuming. And so for a lot of people it was a very difficult time. Also, people started realizing they had a lack of culinary skill, and if you're worried about running out of ingredients, you don't want to be experimenting too much with things. And if your culinary skills are not up to the task, that can be very, very discomforting. People started developing skills, all sorts of YouTube videos, how to cook, how to make basic foods, how to substitute ingredients. So people started being very, very creative, and they were sharing their expertise, and they were sharing their help. We heard from a lot of people that, they were calling up their grandmothers, or their parents and saying, how did you make that dish? So it ended up being a way to really connect with people. Cookbook sales have always been higher than any other category of publishing. Cookbooks have just been, extremely popular during this time. And that's been a real source of comfort for a lot of people. So a lot of people said they're coming out of this much better cooks than they were before. Kind of a very unexpected kind of result. Okay, so after preparation, you have to present the food somehow. Next slide. So, so presentation is, setting the table, how you actually are presenting the food. And, that's, again, having to have constant meals, that makes it hard to be creative all the time. You have to constantly clean the table and then reset the table, and the kids are using the table for their classroom, so how do you manage all of this? So a lot of people have actually found a lot of comfort by bypassing some of those expectations. So they're having gatherings outside with disposable dishware. It means that there's much less cleanup and people are actually enjoying the gathering more. The expectations for formality are not there, and that can be very comforting. Let's see. Okay, so then after presentation, we have consumption. We can go on to the next one. Okay, so consumption is the actual eating itself. Um, you know, a lot of people are snacking way too much because we're home all the time, but at the same time, this can be an area where we can find a lot of comfort too, because we can be a little more organized about what we're eating. We, we're not going to be out and tempted by fast food as much. So in theory, we can actually have healthier eating habits, but the thing about consumption that has been the most difficult, the most discomforting, is not being able to go to restaurants to eat, not being able to meet up with friends and family for eating. And, and then feeling very isolated and very alone because of that. The amount of creative responses to that has been amazing. You've probably have all read about quarantinis, happy hour, virtual happy hours, how many people are doing Zoom cooking together and then eating together, meeting up outside, and a lot of this is very comforting. The expectations have changed a lot, so that gathering together is easier, and it's easier. You don't have to spend all day cooking, perhaps like you maybe did before, because no one's going to come in your house, hopefully. So, so there are all sorts of creative ways that people have been responding to that isolation of just eating alone. Okay, and then something that we always forget about when we talk about food is the last step in the processes of Foodways, which is cleanup. Um, so cleaning up and disposal of food. A lot of people have found it very tedious. They're constantly washing dishes now, because we're constantly eating. At the same time, we're able now to take care more of leftovers. Leftovers are suddenly much more important. If we're not sure how much food we have, we're not going to just throw things out. Also, I've talked to a lot of people about they all have compost piles now, and then that feeds back into the gardening. Also, I think this was from Italy, where people literally were locked down in their apartments, and the only time they could go outside was to take their trash. And so there were these very creative things people were doing. They had certain days and times designated for them to take out their trash. So when they would do that, that was their time to see their neighbors. So people were posting videos of this. There was a ballet dancer who danced with his trash bag all the way from the apartment door to the trash bins. Other people would go out and they hold up signs to say hello to their neighbors. People were being very, very creative, finding comfort through something like throwing out trash that we don't normally think of as very significant or something that could offer comfort. So, and then I'm trying to check and make sure we're in the same. Okay, so one of the last questions that we were asking people was, you can go to the next slide, Robin. Were they developing any new rituals around food during this time? Were they like consciously trying to change things? And people were giving us a lot of really interesting ideas. I think the thing that was the most important, though, Robin, you can change to the next one. People over and over again were saying that they were finding comfort for themselves by giving comfort to other people, you know, by helping their neighbors get food to their neighbors and all. And so part of what we start seeing is that people are much more aware, first of all, of the potential for these daily chores to now have so much more meaning than they did before. But they also are aware, or much more aware, of the inequities that we have in our society, that some people don't have the choice to make food comforting. Some people don't have the opportunities to get together with people, you know, through virtual meetups and things. And so people are trying to make changes so that other people do have the opportunities for comfort, which kind of takes us to my final thought, is that this is a liminal period. We're in between an old and a new stage. The old rules are no longer there. We don't have the new ones yet either. So part of what happens during a liminal stage, we have all these new possibilities. So the question is, are we now going to be treating food differently? We're now more aware of all these areas in which other people cannot gain comfort. So is it possible for us to make some of these changes permanent so that our relationship to food is a more positive one, but we can also use that relationship to change things in society? So I'll leave you all with that thought. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Lucy. So I'm going to present the UU Principles Connection for today. And the theme for today's service is one that is very close to my heart, as anyone who really knows me can attest, because I love food. And as many of us know from our own experience, food is such a reliable, simple way to make ourselves and others happy. It's also the centerpiece of most social and cultural gatherings that we encounter in our lives. The comfort and simple enjoyment that food can give us is certainly one reason why so many of our coping mechanisms during stressful times involve eating, and why we can sometimes go overboard when we need something reassuring during a particularly anxious period of time. And of course, we've had several of those in the recent past. For example, how many of you, so Lucy mentioned bread baking, you know, how many of you started baking bread during the pandemic? Because I know I did. And I never got to the point of actually doing a sourdough starter, but I know a number of you did from your Facebook posts. So I admire you for doing that. I can also, you know, shout out to the MPUUC garden, where we, you know, decided to actually produce our own food with great success, I might add. And not only were we able to produce our own food, but we were, you know, a group of us were gathering together and sharing community and fellowship. And that was also a really valuable part of that project. I will also mention that in my zeal for bread baking, I also ran up against this shortage of yeast. And lo and behold, my in-laws, John's parents, came through, and they had some yeast that they could lend to me. He went to Cleveland, picked it up, brought it home, and I had the yeast that I needed to bake bread. So I'm resonating with a lot of what Lucy has talked about this morning. However, my newfound love for baking turned out to be a mixed blessing in my house, because the sudden appearance of cakes and cookies in our home created a lot of anxiety for my husband, who has struggled with his weight throughout his life and has a very different relationship to food than I do. His is more of a love-hate thing than my 100% love of food. He found it even more anxiety-inducing to have so many caloric temptations within reach. And while we both definitely love food, we discovered a long time ago that my metabolism just works differently than his, meaning that the same piece of cake that means joy and comfort for me means guilt and stress for him, not comfort. So I understand that the comfort of food always has a flip side, and one person's welcome indulgence is another person's serious struggle. We must always be sensitive to that. But food can enrich our lives in ways other than actually eating it, or producing, procuring, preparing, preserving, or presenting it. For example, many paintings, songs, and poems celebrate the beauty and enjoyment of our favorite foods and drinks. In fact, one of my favorite poems ever is by William Carlos Williams, titled "This Is Just to Say." And it's very short, so I'll just recite it for you. The title is "This Is Just to Say." And the poem goes, "I have eaten the plums that were in the icebox, and which you were probably saving for breakfast. Forgive me, they were delicious, so sweet, and so cold." Now, part of the reason I love this poem is because of the delicious way that the words fill my mouth as I say them, almost feeling the zing of a cold plum on my tongue. But another reason is that the person who introduced me to this poem is my mother, a literature and poetry enthusiast, among many other things. And when she isn't immersing herself in weaving or felting or some other textile-based project, she is reading and writing poetry. She took it upon herself when I was still in second grade to start guest teaching poetry in my class. And clearly she understood that a poem about food was a good way to get our attention. And over 35 years later, I still remember that poem that she introduced to me. My mother, of course, was also the primary food maker in our family, and she was always my connection to food in the years before I could feed myself or cook for myself. The familiarity and comfort that I draw from certain foods is in large part thanks to her. And it's largely because of the food that she made for me that I was fortunate enough to grow up happy and healthy. And in the words of M.F.K. Fisher, whose quotes I read you earlier, she was nourishing her beloved few against the hunger of the world. But it's important to recognize, that many children don't grow up with this good fortune. Hunger and food insecurity is a major problem in our country, a problem made all the more disturbing since we supposedly live in a land of plenty. But unfortunately, income inequality in the United States has never been greater than it is today, which means that while some people's bellies are nearly always full, others are nearly always empty. According to the USDA, 10.5% of US households, that's over 13 million people, were food insecure at some time during last year, 2019. At the same time, there are many in this country who do not live within walkable or drivable distance to a grocery store. These are so-called food deserts. which means that their food options are often limited to processed and packaged foods that are high in fat and sugar, but low in actual nutrition. And subsisting on this type of food has serious health consequences, both in the short and long term, that can actually prevent a person from having a long, productive life. As Unitarian Universalists, our first principle is to honor the inherent worth and dignity of every person. And a fundamental part of ensuring that every person feels self-worth and dignity is ensuring that they have the ability to fill their basic needs: healthy food, clean water, safety and shelter, education, and meaningful work. Local community-based organizations like the Brown Bag Food Project in Bowling Green and Food for Thought in Toledo do a wonderful job addressing food insecurity in their respective communities. Their efforts to keep people fed in the short term, from as little as a day to as long as a week, have really made an impact. But more needs to be done to fix the nation's food insecurity problem. From protecting our land and water from pollution, to expanding programs like food stamps and school lunches, to instituting a living wage. Only when our systems and policies are designed to ensure the access of every person to what will nourish them in body, mind, and spirit can we ensure the worth and dignity of every person. We are now going to move on to our offertory. Now more than ever, we are counting on your pledge payments and donations to help sustain and strengthen this congregation that is so important to all of us, supporting our efforts to be a community of love, truth, justice, and service. Please click on the link in the chat box or scan the QR code and be sure to select the correct designation on the drop-down box when you donate. Thank you. And now we will have a video performance of Gather in Spirit, a reimagining of Gather the Spirit, which is written and performed by our friend Jim Scott.
I wrote this song 30 years ago so my friend Pat LaManna could give it this contemporary message. Gather in spirit, not face to face. Let's do what we can to flatten the curve. Wash your hands often and don't touch your face. This virus is something no one deserves. Gather on Skype, gather on Zoom, gather by phone with family and friends. Gather online, but don't leave Let's all stay safe until this crisis ends. Gather on Facebook, but not for too long. There's so many ways to sweeten the time. Take up crochet, write a new song, read a good book, bake brownies sublime. Gather on Skype, gather on Zoom, gather by phone with family and friends. Gather online, but don't leave your room. Let's all stay safe until this crisis ends. Gather in spirit, pray for the scared, the sick and the poor, the lonely at home. Count all your blessings and reach out and share. Let everyone know that they're not alone. Gather in Skype, gather on Zoom, gather by phone with family and friends. Gather online, but don't leave your room. Let's all stay safe until this crisis ends.
Thank you to Jim, who was generous enough to share that video with the UUA. So our closing words for today are a poem by Irene Latham, and the title of this poem is Like Peace for Chocolate. If only it came foil wrapped with a creamy center, I'd take a bite and you'd take a bite. And for an instant, all our struggles and opinions, our this is me, this is you battle lines would turn dark, bittersweet, milky. And then even that would disappear, leaving our mouths soft and thick with hope. Please join me in reading the words. Oh, sorry, Lucy, this is your part.
Please join me in reading the words for extinguishing our chalice that can be found in the comments in the chat box. As this flame is extinguished, we pledge ourselves to be bearers of the light wherever we are.
After the service, we will turn on all videos and microphones. Feel free to stay in Zoom and chat with your fellow MVUUC members and friends for our coffee hour. Please be patient, as turning on the cameras must be done one at a time, and it can take a few minutes to get to everyone. And now, for our closing song, let us sing Go With a Song in Your Heart. You can find the words as a comment in the Zoom chat box. Go with a song in your